We're talking about torches and oxygen availability, smoke, and other details of venturing underground with low-tech light sources in the context of fantasy role-playing. Well, this was brought up at the Adepts Play Discord, and it's turned into a post and some discussion. I guarantee absolutely no insights from what I'm about to say, except that my mind is wandering off into wherever it's gone because of this kind of cool discussion that people are sharing ideas about. So here goes. Okay, the first concept is people versus furniture. And this is something that I came up with a while ago in talking about playing games like Sorcerer and a few others, which is that in fiction there are people and there are furniture. And the terms turn out to be wonderfully non-literal because you can have a person there in the fiction, with a face and stuff, or there who is furniture and doesn't do anything except sit in the room or be there in the frame, and there you go. That's what they did. And there's nothing wrong with furniture. Having a lot of it around allows for our focus on what is moving around and doing things, the people. And then conversely, people can be anything in fictional terms. I mean, the door stops you from going through. And the, malevolent little object, bounces out of your hand and flees away from you. The cliff tries to kill you. Stuff like that. Now, bearing in mind that really obvious versions are things like traps and hazards and fires and, pitfalls and stuff like that, which are literally nothing more nor less than monsters and opponents. It doesn't matter if their stat block in the rules looks like a monster or an opponent or not. It doesn't matter what mechanics, whether they're the same or different, they are opponents. So those are like really active, people, adversarial people. And then I'm also talking about people as potential actors. The stone wall, for example, may appear to us mainly as furniture because it sort of enhances the general notion that we are in a ruined fortress that had, cells and maybe a torture chamber or something underneath it, and we are now traversing down there through the ruins of this thing, and the walls are stone, and we say, oh, stone walls. Okay, I get it. Part of being here. Well, that can take on a somewhat more active person-like quality when and if one is hurled against it and the wall hits you. It does a thing. It is now a player. It's sort of been sitting there as a potential player. So, first of all, persons versus furniture and just what those are. Second, the potential of furniture to wake up. I use the term ascended regarding non-player characters in Circle of Hands, for example, when characters who are furniture with very minor mechanics associated with them, acquire names. Let's see, as a matter of fact, I even think that I originally introduced that in my games anyway, with Trollbabe. So anyway, that's very much a quality of furniture and people, is that the former can become the latter through activity. And for the most part, however, they don't. Sometimes things that are designated furniture specifically are kept away from that awakening or ascending, very specifically so. Okay, with that distinction in mind, now let's talk about the specifics in this case of air. Because air, for the most part, in role-playing, in my experience, is furniture. We do want to see our characters walking around and doing things. We do want to see them breathing and talking, or talking, therefore they must be breathing. We want them alive, not dead, and breathing is symbolically and physiologically a big deal for that. So, okay. So there must be air, but it's not like we have to talk about, there being air. If my character says X to your character, I don't have to suddenly say, well, I inhale. And, we all know that we roll the mechanic for air, or verbally all acknowledge, make sure that we all agree, and understand that air is here and is having this consequence. No, it's furniture. It's highly implicitly there, and we don't care beyond that. Light in play that takes characters into lightless areas is pretty similar in most cases. If we don't have light, we're not going to be able to do it. So we want to do it. So this thing that I've got is giving us light. Okay, it's like the air. Now we can see. Okay, and we're going through, and what do we see? And that's the end of it. And whatever else is necessary minimally to keep that, to stay the case, to maintain that as the case, is fine. The fact that it's nominally, I say fact, nominally it's fire on a stick, but who cares? It's, should we get into action and we already have this somewhat, dodgy notion of a confined space, weapons of varying lengths and positioning and so forth, and then we have to make decisions about whether that matters at all. Whether we're going to say, okay, we're going to roll the combat mechanics and just say that whatever happened, nobody, chopped anyone else's head off by accident with their halberd, because that's not what we're here for. Same thing with the light. But even more so, it's very easy to just sort of forget about this being fire on a stick and instead just say, hey, we already established the place is lit up because we have our torches. It's lit up and we have our fight in the lit up area, and don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Don't worry about like, okay, I draw my sword and ready my shield. Well, where did the torch go? Well, I dropped it. Well, that means there's fire on a stick rolling around and that's supposed to be our light source. No, forget it. For all we care, the torches all floated up, toward the ceiling, evenly distributed, and we are in a lit room. And why? Because we had torches, and we're done. We're here to fight these guys downstairs in this place, and the torches are extremely nominally present just so we can do it. Like, there's air because we need to be talking. Done. So you can do that. And then there comes the question of saying how much of the furniture in any given situation, role-playing, can be awakened by activity. And you can't go to realism and say, oh, well, if it's realistic. No. Realism is what you say after you decide to do that. And so, therefore, it's purely up to you whether the conditions of the torches and the air are going to become non-furniture and will instead become people. And then the further choice of, if they're people, when can they be adversarial? So that becomes the next big choice. Okay, awakening them into people is fine. Okay, we'll toss in a few more details. We have to consider where the torch is, or, how am I going to do this without burning? I mean, after all, awakening a torch into non-furniture isn't that hard when it's to your own benefit. You can say, aha, it's on fire. I'm going to light that stuff on fire because I was holding a torch. I thought it was a light source all this time. It was kind of magical, sort of. But no, it's fire on a stick, and I can light that stuff on fire. So awakening your stuff that way is quite common. Another common thing is when the furniture has implied content that doesn't upset anybody. It just happens not to have been mentioned and can be similarly awakened. People do this all the time in role-playing. It's really common. So here we are in the ruins upstairs in the fortress, and the remnants of the old banquet hall are still there, and the old fireplace, all ruined, is there on the wall, and above it is this mantelpiece. Well, anyway, someone has been describing this for us, whether they're reading off of a page or whether they have made it up or whether they're making up now. I don't care. But whoever has authority for telling us where we are and what we see is saying this. And sooner or later, in the course of events, one of us having, there's mention of old appointments of this banquet hall, some of them still lying about. And no mention has been made of precisely what is on the mantelpiece, but in the course of events, one of us says, I'm grabbing the old candlestick holder off the mantelpiece, and I'm going to beat that guy, about that. I'm going to smite them hip and thigh, right, with my acquisition here. And sometimes this is leavened by the phrase, is there an old candle holder on the mantelpiece? And the response is usually, and I would say almost universally, why, of course there is. The question is almost kind of pro forma in some ways. And I have spotted in play that when you say, there must be one, I grab it, and sometimes the other person, will do a little double take. They kind of would have preferred to have been asked, but they were going to say yes anyway. So they're like, cool. And you keep going. So it's really not that big a deal. We all understand that given the conditions that have been described, that there is an immense amount of implied content which is available for awakening. Now that I have discussed people versus furniture, now I have discussed awakening of both known things and implied things. Then back to what I was saying a minute ago, when awakened things can become adversaries. So let's talk about air and torches in that regard, because as long as we have decided that fire on sticks is now going to be, something to pay a little more attention to as, active participants based on whatever qualities we choose to give them. Because remember, they can still act like we want. They can act just enough like fire on sticks to be impromptu weapons or, modes of ignition of something else. But we don't want them to be fire and sticks in any other way. But let's say we do. Now that we've talked about them as fire and sticks, they're sort of more awakened to be more personable, right? To do more. And you're going, well, this thing can do lots of things. Then you suddenly realize that this thing, if we go along the lines of that kind of thinking, that this thing is quite adversarial. This thing can't burn you by accident. This thing can, you see, it's fiction, so it's not by accident. It burns you. Done. And then it can suck up the oxygen that you're trying to breathe. I mean, after all, now that we've got fire and sticks, then the oxygen in the room becomes a participant, potentially. And we are sort of enjoying this whole business of enclosed place down here underneath. We're back in the dungeony area now. We're underneath the fortress again. And the enclosure, the darkness, the stink, the disuse, which is almost as disturbing as the use and the past. All of these things, are going on. And the idea of the enclosure is important. And we, having awakened the torches already for some reason, pretty hard not to start thinking about the smoke they produce and the nature of the quality of the air that we're breathing. And all of a sudden we recognize that we have walked into a hazard, a foe, partly of our own making. Now, let's back up a little bit and say, all right, let's remember that adversaries come into play. The prepared material for play or the improvisational nature of this system, whichever, could easily put some sort of dreadful, environmental adversary upon us, whenever. as far as our characters are concerned, could be any minute. So the idea that our own behavior could well have prompted such a thing is really not very difficult to understand. It's a little appealing in a lot of ways. Once you're starting to think of your torches as people, then their active role as people becomes a desirable thing. Now let's think about adversaries. Again, I brought up the business about a known one or a prepared one or one that isn't due to your own making. That is to say, not due to your character's own actions. The spears sliding out of the wall, whatever, right? And recognize that they come in two flavors. Flavor number one is that there is a nominal solution, a known solution to someone, whether it's in the pages of a book, whether it is in the mind of one person, at the table. But there are known factors. Should we be in the I just keep making up, alternate little places around this fortress, but here we are in one of the little old cells there down in the nasty ex-dungeon torture place, and in one of the cells, under the decaying pallet is indeed the trap door with the escape route. And it's known that that's there. We don't know it. Our characters don't, even if we do, whatever. But the point is that it's a designated thing. It's a piece of the whole scene. Well, then there are adversaries for which there is no such thing. Not even you got to whittle it down all the way to 0 in some score and then you're fine, you're done with it. Not even that. It's just there's no designated solution, and you are in the position of looking at your own designated solutions to things, mostly things on your character sheet, and often used a little bit imaginatively, like, well, if we cast this spell and then you cast that spell, and the crisscrossing effects produce a unique situation, and that actually might do the job here. Add to that whatever you might want to say about whatever devices, tools, skill sets that characters have, and you can look across that and start coming up with novel behaviors to cope with this. Now, you could have done that with something with a designated solution too. It's just that in a situation without a designated solution, this is all you have. So part of that, and this is where things get integrated here in terms of what I'm talking about, part of that is awakening things. Pieces of furniture that turn out, you say, well, they have qualities. They have either been implied to be here or they have been mentioned. And we can make use of that. We can actually awaken them, and like the torches, which were sort of magical, floaty, here, not there, here, but not doing anything, sort of intangible, diffuse illumination, but now they are fire on sticks, and you can ignite things with them and get burned with them, perhaps accidentally, and all sorts. And they suck up the oxygen, which they weren't doing before, but now they are. And so here we're in the situation of looking around and coping with an adversary in a fashion that says, let's look at the totality of the furniture in which us, the people, and remember, torches here are people too, and the doors of the cells, insofar as they're still intact, those are people. They could do things. So whatever. There's all these people things here, and there's all these furniture thingy here, and we can awaken some of the furniture, some of which has been mentioned to us is actually there. Didn't you say there was or some hasn't been mentioned at all? But it's pretty easy to say, well, I'm going to go and grab that thing. There's one of those around, right? And the answer is, yeah. God, given everything we've said so far, it's got to be. So, yeah. So this can be actually pretty interesting phenomenon in play when the adversary is the result of awakened phenomena, and the solutions require a whole bunch of awakened new phenomena. That's what we're talking about. We can say the easy way would be to have said all the way back in the beginning, torches are people. They will be people. We know they're going to be people. They're going to have these properties. There's 100,000 different properties, some of them formal that I could list here, and others that you're just going to have to say you're going to have to cope with them as we encounter them, because we're taking seriously that these torches are people, and therefore they will be doing things like burning things and perhaps burning you, and having qualities when they're dropped and rolling around that they don't have when you're holding them up. And they suck up oxygen, and they give off all this smoke. We know that going in. We look down that tunnel there, and it's quite likely that someone will say, oh no, oxygen. And so it's just a given that by walking down there that we have awakened the oxygen down there to become adversarial. And that's how it is. So this is perhaps the ideal of, the Boy Scout way of role-playing, always prepared. We know everything. We know what could become an adversary. It's been agreed upon. It's contractual that all these things could happen, right? Well, I'm going to say that no matter how contractual you try to make it, you will always be running into the phenomena of furniture awakening as a piece of play. Whether you insult the butler who was furniture, and it dawns upon somebody who may have authority over the butler's activities, had never really thought of themselves as having authority over the butler's activities. I mean, he doesn't have activities. He just buttles. But now that you've insulted him, well, the butler's going to punch you. That kind of awakening is available. And it will be available always, no matter how contractual you are. So, frankly, I don't really care whether the torches were awakened as people along the way, and then the air was thereby, in kind of a snowball effect, awakened as an adversary, or whether there's freaking rules written down. Maybe you've house rolled huge rules for oxygen deprivation and smoke in your eyes and smoke inhalation and, who knows what about this. Maybe for this particular region, you've got it, designated, torches. Bringing them in here, problem. I don't care if you're all ready prepped or not, or whether this was all awakened all the way through the course of talking and play. Either way, now you're dealing with an adversary. And in role-playing, for all of the various shortcomings or absences or who knows what's, ambiguities, sometimes productive ones that we can name, adversaries aren't one of them. Adversaries we can do. So that's kind of where I'm at, thinking about the variables, that factored into all this discussion. Don't know how insightful it was. I already knew that, one might say. Excellent. I am glad of that.